know how the school board
I'll
is.
brief them.
Even if we tell them for y'all to close, it's up to them to make the decision.
All right, I gotta do this.
Can I be quiet?
Do you want to come in here?
I can shut up. You look amazing. It is. B, should I stop it and then come back? No, I just told Donald he looked good, maybe.
Here we go. Good morning from the National Weather Service office in Lake Charles, Louisiana. I'm meteorologist Donald Jones with your 10:30 a.m. update on what is now Tropical Storm Francine. It has finally developed a closed-off low-level circulation. It now meets all of the criteria to become, by definition, a tropical storm, and it's already had maximum sustained winds near 50 miles per hour for the last 24 hours or so. So it is now officially designated a tropical storm. It finally gets its name. We can stop calling it the potential tropical cyclone, which I know is confusing the hell out of a lot of people. So now it's just a regular, ordinary garden variety tropical storm that's coming here to kill us like normal. Essentially, what we're going to be looking at, we're going to talk about here is the latest forecast track, which has shifted somewhat east over the last few hours. Again, we saw a little bit of an eastward shift to the forecast track last night, and we've seen another little bit of an eastward shift as we've gone through the morning this morning. That's certainly some good news for those of you watching across southeast Texas. Not so good news for those of you watching across parts of south central Louisiana in and around Vermilion Bay. So we're going to talk about all of that and the expected impacts across the region here over the next little while. As always, this is a live interactive briefing, so if you have any questions as we go through our briefing, feel free to post them in our comment section, and we'll go through them just as soon as we wrap up our briefing. Let's go ahead and jump into it here, if I can get my clicker to work properly. Again, the tropical cyclone in the southern Gulf has now developed into a tropical storm. It has officially gotten its name. It is the 6th name of the season, Tropical Storm Francine now. Maximum sustained winds are near 50 miles per hour. Now, the overall forecast philosophy hasn't changed a whole lot. We were expecting it to become a tropical storm today. It is still forecast to become at least a Category 1 hurricane before making landfall somewhere across south central Louisiana Wednesday evening into Wednesday night. Hurricane watches and storm surge watches have both been posted as of this morning. We'll talk about that here in just a little while as well. This is the 10 a.m. advisory from the National Hurricane Center. You can see maximum sustained winds now, or has been near 50 miles per hour and continues to be near 50 miles per hour. But now that it has developed that low-level circulation, some intensification, some more ready intensification is likely to occur over the next 36 hours or so. Looking at the satellite here this morning, the overall structure of the storm has gotten much better. And as that continues to get better, we'll see a more significant intensification. I'll show you that here in just a second. It's still not moving very quickly. We're looking at about a north-northwest movement at about 5 miles per hour. That is going to continue for probably about another 24 hours. And then as it begins this curve off to the north and northeast, it's going to begin to accelerate into a cold front. That cold front that's actually came through the area the other day. It's been sitting just off the northern Gulf Coast. It's going to begin to accelerate into that storm all the way through landfall. So this is not a situation where we're expecting the storm to stall anywhere. It is going to continue to move, and it's actually probably going to be accelerating to around about 15 miles per hour as it makes landfall and moves inland beyond that. Again, it is expected to be a Category 1 hurricane. A Category 2 hurricane is not out of the realm of possibility at this point. We could be looking at a low-end, mid-range Category 2 hurricane. We always like to say, prepare for one category higher than what's actually being forecasted. So we're officially forecasting a Category 1. We want to prepare for at least a Category 2 with this storm. Taking a look at the visible satellite imagery this morning, you can see this large blob of cloudiness. That is Francine. And despite the fact that it looks like a little bit of a mess, it actually is much more organized than it was this time yesterday. You can see this large cluster of a very white kind of clouds here. Let me see if I can find my pencil tool here. And this is what we refer to as a central dense overcast, this whole area right here. And that's an indication of the storm getting itself better organized. Now, the low-level circulation is somewhere up in this area here. So most of the cloud cover is still displaced from the center at this point, but it is beginning to wrap around that low-level circulation. So as it does so, that's an indication of the storm getting itself better organized and an indication of intensification. And I expect to see that as we continue to go through the day today and over the next couple of days. As I mentioned, hurricane watches and storm surge watches have been posted across the region. The areas highlighted in that the purple color there, that is the hurricane watches. So that extends from, includes Acadia, Vermilion, Lafayette, Iberia, St. Martin, St. Mary, and Eastern Cameron parishes. A hurricane watch, of course, means that hurricane conditions are possible within the watch area within 48 hours. And then a tropical storm watch has now been issued for Calcasieu, Jeff Davis, Western Cameron in southwest Louisiana, as well as Orange, southern Jefferson County, and southern Newton counties in southeast Texas. And very similar to the hurricane watch, a tropical storm watch means that tropical storm conditions are possible in the watch area within the next 48 hours. So we're within roughly 2 days of landfall at this point. Those watches have gone up. By this time tomorrow, those parts of those areas will be upgraded to tropical storm warnings at that time. In addition, we also have a storm surge watch that is now in effect for parts of the region. This is going to be for coastal portions of these parishes and counties. Obviously, the storm surge isn't going to get that far inland, except perhaps in Cameron, where it's very flat. But storm surge watches are now in effect for Cameron Parish, as well as Vermilion, St. Martin, and St. Mary parishes, as well as coastal portions of Jefferson County. A storm surge watch, that means storm surge of 3 feet or greater is possible within the watch area within 48 hours. So this is the area where we could potentially see the most significant storm surge. And we'll talk more about the actual values of those storm surge here in just a moment. Let's talk now about the probabilities of seeing tropical storm force winds in your particular area across the region. I'm going to go ahead and make this full screen so you can take a little bit closer look at it there. You can see these values. If you've been watching us the last couple of days, these have been going up. So we're currently looking at about a 70 to 80% chance of seeing tropical storm force winds across coastal parts of Vermilion, Iberia, St. Martin, and St. Mary parishes. A roughly 60 to 70% chance of seeing tropical storm force winds across southwest Louisiana. So that's going to include the Lake Charles area. And then a 30 to 60% chance of seeing tropical storm force winds across southern parts of Jefferson and Orange counties. And as the storm continues to get better organized and continues to approach the coastline, we'll see these probabilities continue to go up even further by tonight, and again, more so by tomorrow. So at this point, there's a pretty high probability that we're going to be seeing at least tropical storm force winds, that's winds of 40 miles per hour or greater, across a large swath of southwest and south central Louisiana. Even parts of coastal, say Jefferson County, Orange County, those areas could potentially see some gusts of 40 miles per hour as well. Those of you watching us from southeast Louisiana, you are also looking at pretty high probabilities of seeing at least tropical storm force winds from Baton Rouge over towards New Orleans and up towards the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain as well. This is the probability of seeing hurricane force winds across the area. These are lower because we're expecting a much narrower swath of hurricane force winds if they develop. So we're looking at lower overall probabilities, but generally a 20 to 30% chance of seeing hurricane force winds across coastal parts of Vermilion, Iberia, St. Martin, and St. Mary parishes. And then a 10 to 20% chance of seeing hurricane force winds across coastal portions of Cameron Parish. And again, just like with the tropical storm probabilities, these probabilities will also go up as the storm intensifies and as it approaches the northern Gulf Coast. Now, when can we expect these winds to actually begin? This hasn't changed a whole lot, which is a good thing. We like to see consistency in our forecast tracks. We're looking at the tropical storm force winds to begin, it looks like sometime Wednesday morning between about 8 a.m. and noon for those tropical storm force winds to begin. So this is your deadline. If you intend to evacuate, if you intend to make preparations to ride the storm out, this is when you want to have those preparations completed by Wednesday morning around 8 a.m. because at this point, conditions will begin to deteriorate across a large swath of the region. This is the earliest possible time of arrival, reasonably speaking, for those tropical storm force winds. So we could be looking at it as early as very late Tuesday evening, between about 8 p.m. and midnight. But the most likely time is going to be Wednesday morning. Now let's talk a little bit now about what's actually steering the storm here and what's actually causing it to do what it's going to do. The storm is presently moving to the northwest at about 5 miles per hour. It's moving fairly slow. There are two things actually driving the storm. We've got an area of high pressure over here in the eastern Gulf of Mexico. Of course, winds around areas of high pressure spin clockwise, like so. There's also a cold front over the northern Gulf Coast here. This has winds that are actually moving kind of east, kind of parallel to the coastline. So the storm is on the outer periphery of this high pressure area, and it's going to continue to kind of slowly drift to the northwest. Eventually, it's going to begin to come under the influence of this cold front along the northern Gulf Coast. That's going to cause it to turn more northward and eventually more northeastward. And that's why the forecast track is going to eventually kind of curve. Then it's going to get caught up in this cold front and begin to accelerate off to the northeast. And that's why we're expecting the storm to actually increase in forward speed as it approaches the coastline and moves inland. It's going to get caught up in this cold front. The other thing that this cold front is going to potentially do is provide a whole bunch of wind shear across the northern Gulf Coast. So conditions down in the southern Gulf of Mexico, as I'm going to show you here in just a second, are fairly favorable for intensification. But as the storm approaches the coast, the wind shear associated with this cold front may begin to kind of tear the storm apart. So it may reach its maximum intensity before it actually gets on shore and may actually slowly begin to weaken as it approaches the northern Gulf Coast. Just something to kind of keep in mind as we see this storm develop over the next couple of days. Let's take a look at the other the factors that are affecting the potential intensity of the storm. Of course, sea surface temperatures still running in the mid to upper 80s across all of the Gulf of Mexico. We need at least 80 degrees Fahrenheit to support a tropical system. We're well above that. We're between about 86 and 88 degrees. So sea surface temperatures are certainly supportive of tropical intensification. The other thing that we look at, as we talked about a moment ago, is wind shear. The wind shear across the southern Gulf of Mexico right now is very light. You can see that in the areas in the little light greens and blues there across the southern and western Gulf of Mexico. As you get closer to the Gulf Coast, though, the northern Gulf Coast, you can see those areas highlighted in the red. That's areas of higher wind shear associated with that cold front. So the storm is going to be intensifying for the next 24 to 36 hours or so. But then as it approaches the coast, it's going to begin to run into that wind shear. So it may actually begin a little bit of a weakening trend. The Hurricane Center doesn't explicitly call for a weakening trend, but it calls for a maintenance at its current level instead of continued intensification as it approaches the Gulf Coast. So exactly when that storm begins to encounter that wind shear is going to have a large effect as to how much it's going to potentially either stop intensifying or potentially weaken. The hope is that it'll encounter that a little bit earlier, and so it'll be steadily weakening as it reaches the coast. But we can't count on that at this point because, at least according to most of our computer models, we are going to be looking at least a storm that's maintaining its intensity up through landfall. Now let's talk about the potential impacts across the region. What are we going to expect? Now, all of these impacts are based on the current forecast track. If the forecast track or the intensity of the storm changes, these impacts, of course, are going to change along with it. The first thing I want to talk about is the potential for very heavy rainfall. We're looking at roughly about a 15% chance of flash flooding anywhere in the areas highlighted in yellow there. So that extends from Beaumont to Lake Charles to Lafayette to New Iberia. This is for Tuesday. So mainly Tuesday, kind of later in the day. We're going to start to see those outer rain bands move into the area as late as tomorrow or as early as tomorrow afternoon into tomorrow evening. Now, as we get into Wednesday, the overall flood risk gets significantly higher. The area highlighted in red there is a 40% or greater chance of seeing flash flooding. So that it does include the Lake Charles area and points further east over towards Lafayette, New Iberia, Baton Rouge, over towards New Orleans, Slidell. There's a large swath even into southern Mississippi at pretty high risk of seeing flash flooding. And this could potentially go even higher as the storm approaches as we get into late tonight and into tomorrow. Bottom line, we're looking at fairly high rainfall totals across the region with this. This is normally the case when we're talking about any kind of tropical system. Here are the forecast rainfall totals across the region. Generally speaking, along the coast and east of where the storm is expected to make landfall. So that's kind of in and around Vermilion Bay, up towards Lafayette, east to Baton Rouge, looking at anywhere between 6 to 8 inches of rainfall. with some localized amounts of over 12 inches. That's a foot of rainfall possible in parts of those regions. Back to the west across Lake Charles up towards Alexandria, you're kind of in that yellow area. That's a 4 to 6 inch rainfall section. And then back across southeast Texas, since the storm track has moved somewhat to the east recently, the overall rainfall totals have come down. So we're looking at anywhere between about 1 to possibly up to 4 inches across parts of southeast Texas, essentially east of Houston to Beaumont, up across Jasper and Newton counties, Tyler County, and Hardin County as well. So that kind of gives you an idea of what to expect as far as overall rainfall totals. Talking now about storm surge here, this is the potential for the highest storm surge we can expect to experience with this storm. We're looking at 5 to 10 feet of storm surge possible, essentially from Cameron east to Port Fourchon. Now, not everywhere is going to see that level of storm surge. This is kind of a reasonable worst case scenario. Areas along and east of the center of circulation are going to potentially see this surge. If you're on the west side of the storm, though, the current forecast track brings it in right just west of Vermilion Bay. So if that were to verify, areas west of the storm, Cameron Parish, for example, would not see this level of storm surge. Points east of the center of circulation landfall, though, will. So based on this current forecast track, areas in and around Vermilion Bay, 5 to 10 feet of storm surge. Points further east into southeast Louisiana, 5 to 10 feet of storm surge. From Port Fourchon to the mouth of the Mississippi, between 4 and 7. And then wrapping around Lake Pontchartrain and Lake Maurepas, anywhere between 2 to 4. Back further to the west, across west of Cameron to High Island, 3 to 5 feet of surge. But again, that's only going to be if you're on the west side of the storm. You could potentially see some coastal flooding ahead of the storm, because when you think about it, let me go ahead and I'm going to see if I can back up here just a little bit. This will be a good example. So as the storm approaches, again, in low pressure systems, you're looking at a counterclockwise circulation of winds. So as the storm approaches the coastline, the winds are going to be wrapping counterclockwise around. So you could potentially see some coastal flooding initially as the storm approaches across parts of Cameron, southeast Texas. Then as the storm kind of gets even with, you start to see these winds come back around out of the north, and that storm surge threat and coastal flooding threat will come to an end. So if we're going to see coastal flooding or storm surge across parts of southeast Texas, it's going to occur very early on in the storm, probably late tomorrow into early Wednesday morning. All right, so that's pretty much what I have here from the National Weather Service in terms of impacts and the forecast. Our next briefing is going to be 4 p.m. this afternoon. We'll have another briefing later on tonight at 10:30. So if you have no questions and are happy with the forecast, you're free to head out. If not, if you do have a question, we are going to answer questions here for the next little while. So feel free to throw them in our comment section, and we will answer them accordingly. For those of you still wondering when are we going to do our parish by parish and county by county breakdowns of expected impacts, those are coming, but it is still a little too early for that, since we're not looking at landfall until sometime Wednesday evening. So we'll probably have those either late tonight or sometime tomorrow. They are on the way, but I want to make sure we have a good handle on exactly where the storm's going to make landfall before I start giving that out, because once it gets out there, it's very hard to take it back. So I want to make sure we have a good understanding of what's going to happen before we get those out there, but they are coming at some point. So let me go ahead and back up here and check our comment section here to see if we do have any questions. Bear with me just a moment. If you do have a question, please throw it in there. Bethany says, please don't under forecast St. Landry Parish. All models show us getting us 70-mile-per-hour winds at some point. I don't think all models show that, but no, we're not intentionally under forecasting anybody. The forecasts that we put out are based on our best knowledge-backed opinion at the time. Candy asks, could it possibly jog back to the west? Yes, it absolutely could. That's why we still have this cone of uncertainty. Let me go ahead and make this full screen again so you can take a little bit of a look at it here. Right now, the cone of uncertainty essentially extends from roughly the Texas-Louisiana state line east to New Orleans. So you could see a fluctuation in track back or forth either way. So pretty much all of Louisiana essentially is in the cone of uncertainty still. So if you're anywhere in Louisiana, you could still potentially see this track shift back one way or the other. The other thing I want to mention, very important to keep in mind, The cone of uncertainty that you see here does not say anything about the potential impacts. Impacts will extend well outside of that cone of uncertainty. You saw, like on our storm surge graphic, we had storm surge back across into southeast Texas, even though the cone of uncertainty doesn't extend back that way. So we can have impacts well outside of the cone of uncertainty, especially when it comes to flooding and rainfall. But all impacts are possible outside of that cone of uncertainty. Amanda says that looks far more organized than yesterday. Yes, it certainly is. It's finally getting its act together, and we expect it to continue to intensify for the next couple of days. Mary asks, is there any loop current eddy areas in Francine's path that would fuel intensification? Not that I've seen. It's a pretty steady state sea surface temperature out there, at least at the present. So I don't foresee that being too much of a factor. Steady intensification is forecast. There are some models that still show the possibility of a period of rapid intensification, but it's not necessarily due to warm eddies in the sea surface temperatures. Sherry asks, what are the odds that it moves back west to Lake Charles? At this moment, not particularly high, because most of the computer models are keeping it kind of east towards the Vermilion Bay area, but it is a possibility. It's not something that we're ruling out. Is Lake Charles out of the woods? No, definitely not. I would not say that anybody in coastal parts of Louisiana is out of the woods at this point. At a minimum, we're still going to see impacts, even if the eye of the storm doesn't move directly over us or nearby. You're still going to be looking at significant rainfall and some gusty winds to tropical storm force. So no, Lake Charles is not out of the woods from this. Jason asks, how likely are track changes over the coming hours? Almost certainly. With every forecast update, there is almost always a track shift one way or the other based on the latest computer model information and the expertise of the National Hurricane Center. So I would say it's almost certain that we're going to see at least somewhat of a track shift over the next few hours and few days. Brock's asking, is there any reports on school closures? There was supposed to be, unless I was mistaken, there was supposed to be a press conference at 10 a.m. I didn't actually see it yet, so I have no reports on school closures at this time. I thought they were going to make any kind of announcements regarding that at that meeting or at that briefing, but I haven't actually seen that briefing take place yet. I expect that will be out at some point today, but no, I don't have any information on that at present. Jamie's asking about the potential for tornadoes. That's one thing that we haven't really discussed yet with regards to the threats and the potential impacts. Yes, there will be the risk of tornadoes with this. Historically speaking, we usually see tornadoes along and east of the center of circulation. That's where the vast majority of tornadoes develop. So in this case, if we were looking at a landfall right around Intracoastal City, most of any tornado threat would be kind of east of Vermilion Bay. The overall risk across from Lafayette to Lake Charles, across southeast Texas, would be relatively low, but it's not completely zero, even on the west side of the storm. So yes, tornadoes are a threat with pretty much all landfalling tropical systems, and that will be the case with this one as well. I'll have more details on that here probably either late tonight or tomorrow. The Storm Prediction Center is a little bit slower to get their threat levels out with that, but once that is available, I'll have that for you. Macy says it's going to rain. Yes, that sums it up. It is going to rain. Brock asks, when will hurricane warnings be issued? Hurricane warnings will be issued probably this time tomorrow or thereabouts. Hurricane warnings are issued about 24 hours before landfall. So the watches just came out. The warnings will be out about 24 hours from now. Possibly very late tonight, but I think probably tomorrow morning. Bethany says, why does St. Landry Parish not have any warnings or watches given the models are predicting high winds and high rain totals? Well, first off, we probably will have a flood watch out at some point. It's just not there yet. As far as hurricane or tropical storm warnings for St. Landry Parish, those are also probably coming at some point. You're just not within that window. Right now, we're focused right along the coastline. As we get into that time frame window, you'll see those watches and warnings extended further inland. Elizabeth asks, how many hours will it take to pass? How long are we going to experience these very strong winds? That's still a little bit up in the air because it depends on the exact size of the storm and the radius of the winds. Generally speaking, we're probably going to be looking, we're going to look at tropical storm force winds much longer than hurricane force winds. Tropical storm force winds, like we talked about earlier, are going to begin Wednesday morning. They're going to continue to possibly as late as Thursday morning. So, you could be looking at up to a 24-hour period of wind gusts up to tropical storm force. The hurricane force winds are going to be in a much narrower band, so it's going to be a much shorter duration period. So you could be looking at only, perhaps if you're looking at just a Category 1 storm, maybe just a couple of hours of actual hurricane force winds. But that's going to depend on the exact size and intensity of the storm at landfall. Brady asked, will it weaken before landfall with the wind shear and colder waters? Not so much colder waters, but there is going to be some increasing wind shear. So yeah, there is the possibility that we could see some slight weakening before it actually moves ashore. The waters all the way up to the coast are still very warm though. So there's not going to be any weakening as a result of colder waters. Princess says, I feel like Lake Charles is getting under forecasted. Well, here's the thing. We don't feel. And what I mean by that is all the information I'm giving you right now is based on sound science. We don't put feelings in our science. We don't put feelings in our forecasts. They're all based on the latest model data, the latest expertise for pattern recognition and weather patterns in this area. So that's what we based our forecasts on. Teresia, I think I said that right. Should Iberia Parish prepare for a direct track impact? If not direct, it looks like it's going to be very close right now. Yes, so I would prepare for hurricane force winds in and around the Iberia Parish area, St. Martin, St. Mary, coastal Vermilion. Those are the areas that I would prepare for hurricane force winds in right now. Ashley's asking about approximate times for coastal flooding and surge for the Avery Island area and all of areas around Vermilion Bay. You're going to be looking at that coastal flooding beginning probably late tomorrow night and then kind of ramping up into Wednesday morning. Of course, the peak is going to be right around the time the storm makes landfall. So it's going to be probably late Wednesday afternoon into Wednesday evening. But it's going to begin as early as possibly late tomorrow night into early Wednesday morning. Brandon says that WWL is saying for Bayou region, get prepared for a Category 2. Is that possible? Yes, a Category 2 is not out of the realm of possibility. The official forecast is for a Category 1 right now, but we've been saying prepare for a category higher than is actually being forecasted. And so, yeah, that would be a Category 2. That is certainly within the realm of possibility. Ashton asked a similar question. Do you think this storm could overachieve? It is certainly possible. There's plenty of precedent for that. Many storms have in the past. So yes, it's certainly possible it could be stronger than what we're indicating here. Chazil asks, are spin-off tornadoes a thing if we are on the west side? It's less likely on the west side. There historically have been fewer tornadoes on the west side of the storm, but there are a possibility. So it's not impossible to get a tornado on the west side, although the overall risk is lower. Alicia asked, could we see delta rain in the Lacassine since it's showing the bulk of the rain in the upper left quadrant? The reason for that right now is because of how it has been pretty lopsided recently. Most of the rain activity and the winds have been on the west side of the storm. As the storm gets better organized, that activity is going to begin to wrap around to the south and then again to the east. I still think the heaviest rain is going to be on the east side of the storm. That doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't going to be any rain or very little rain on the west side of the storm. There certainly very well could be. Let me go ahead and pull our rainfall graphic back up here. Let's see, it is right there. I'll make this full screen for you because that's kind of hard to see behind me. So generally speaking, so for the Lacassine, Lake Charles area, 4 to 6 inches of rain is what we're forecasting right now. Along and east of that center of circulation, rainfall totals are going to be significantly higher. We're looking at anywhere between 6 to 8 inches, possibly up to 12 inches in some locations. So, significant rainfall across a wide swath of southern Louisiana. Regardless of whether you're on the west or east side of the storm. Kelsey asked if the cone shifts a little bit back to the west, would southeast Texas be back in the cone? Yes. Right now, the leftmost edge of the cone of uncertainty is roughly right along the Texas-Louisiana border. If we saw a shift of the track back to the west, that would put southeast Texas back in that cone. Kelly asks, is it possible for it to slow down or stall? We're not expecting that at this point because, again, it's going to be, like we talked about earlier, it's going to be moving into a stationary cold front over the northern Gulf Coast. That should actually help it accelerate. And you can see that in the forecast graphic here. You can see how the dots there are initially very close together for the next 24 to 36 hours or so. And they begin to spread apart a little bit as we get closer to landfall. That's an indication that the storm is expected to be accelerating, increasing in forward speed. We're expecting it to be moving probably about 15 miles an hour or thereabouts as it makes landfall. Casey just asked that. Speed at landfall, again, we're expecting it to be about 15 miles an hour at landfall. Lacey says, is the Tuesday weather going to ground flights out of Lake Charles? Probably not Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, especially as we get later in the day. But no, I don't expect there to be any impacts Tuesday to the Lake Charles airport. Heidi says, this is our first hurricane experience, moved here from the Midwest. We are in Lake Charles. Should we be worried or evacuate, or is this mostly strong winds and rain? Based on the current forecast track, this is going to be mainly heavy rain. There is going to be some gusty winds. My advice to anyone who's experiencing a hurricane for the first time, first off, congratulations. Welcome to the club. It's the club you never wanted to join and hope to never be a part of, but here we are. Secondly, evacuation orders are issued by local emergency management and elected officials, and I would strongly advise you to follow those accordingly. As of right now, I'm not aware of any evacuation orders that are in place anywhere across the region, but should those be issued and you're in the area that it's issued for, then I would strongly consider evacuating at that time. Johnny asks, how often are the projections updated? The official forecast from the Hurricane Center is updated 4 times a day, at 4:30 a.m., 10:30 a.m., at 4 a.m., 10 a.m., 4 p.m., and 10 p.m. I was talking about my briefings. So yeah, then as the storm gets closer, they'll do 3-hourly intermediate advisories. So you'll get a 7 a.m. update, a 1 p.m. update, same thing on the other side, 7 a.m., 7 p.m., 1 a.m., 1 p.m. Update. So potentially every 3 hours. Normally it's every 6 hours for a full update. So the next update from the Hurricane Center this afternoon will be at 4 o'clock. Nick asks, why does the spaghetti model show it making landfall more west between Lake Charles and Lafayette, and the models show it more east towards Lafayette and Baton Rouge? That's first off, this is why we don't show spaghetti models. But spaghetti models and computer models, I think you're getting the impression that they're two different things. The spaghetti models are computer models. They are just a conglomeration. It's all the different computer models thrown on a single sheet. And the downside to looking at that is you're going to have different computer models are always going to show something different. So when you're looking at a spaghetti plot, you're going to find a storm that's coming directly to Lake Charles. You're going to find a track that's going directly to Lafayette. You're going to find a storm that's going to Baton Rouge. You're going to find one that's going to New Orleans. And that's the downside and the problem with looking at spaghetti plots. If you want it to go somewhere, you can find something that's going to show it going somewhere. So you have to be careful when you're looking at that. The majority of computer models right now are showing a landfall approximately in the region that the Hurricane Center is indicating. The Hurricane Center looks at all of these computer models, as do we locally, and they use that to make their forecast. And they incorporate those models along with their own expertise about the current pattern and what they have seen in the past with patterns of this nature, and they use that to create this forecast, which historically has been more accurate than any individual computer model. That's why we don't rely on individual computer models. Jody asks, is there anything else out in the Gulf as we speak besides Francine? Not in the Gulf. There are a couple of areas of disturbed weather that are being watched out in the Atlantic that have pretty decent chances of development, but nothing else in the Gulf right now. Lacey says there was an announcement that there will be an update by 3 p.m. I'm guessing you're talking about maybe the evacuations and or area closures. Yeah, a couple other people saying the same thing. So yeah, I haven't independently verified that, but it seems to make sense that there would be an announcement later on this afternoon. Okay, just running through a whole bunch of people saying that there'll be an announcement this afternoon. Kasha asks, what are the chances that it doesn't turn as quickly as y'all have it? It's certainly a possibility, but that's why we have the cone of uncertainty. We're expecting that turn to the northeast to begin probably by sometime mid-morning tomorrow. There's roughly about a 50-mile diameter stretch each way. If it were to be a little bit slower to turn than is currently being indicated, you could be looking at a little bit more of a westward push. Same thing the other way if it were to turn a little later. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that could happen. This is our best forecast based on the current data that we have. Eric says, when will Lake Charles return to normal weather with the current forecast? Well, this storm will be out of here by Thursday evening. So we'll be back to, if you want to call it, quote unquote, normal weather by Thursday night into Friday. Cheryl says, Donald, I'm up in Illinois right now, and the air is cool, dry, and breezy. Why wouldn't this wind air affect the cyclone and break it up? Because it's up in Illinois and not down here. If that air mass was closer to the coast, then that cool, dry air would be ingested into the storm and could potentially weaken it. But your air is way up there, and I'd much rather be up there with you right now in that much nicer air. It's a really nice out there today, but we've got a much more tropical air mass approaching us by tomorrow. Lori asked, when will the next track update be? The next update from the Hurricane Center comes out at 4 o'clock. Courtney's asking, when will evacuations be issued? Evacuations can be issued anytime from now through, the time the storm makes landfall. I can't say with any certainty. That's up to the local emergency managers and elected officials to make. They are briefed the same as you are. They were briefed at 10:15 this morning, about 15 minutes before we came on the air here. So they have the same information you do, and they'll make those decisions accordingly based on. They all each have their individual plans on what to do in certain situations, and they'll make those evacuation decisions based on those. Jennifer says they're tuning in from Sour Lake Elementary. Students want to know if there is anything that their family should prepare for in Sour Lake, Texas. Well, the good news is that the forecast track has been shifting further to the east, away from the Sour Lake area. So the impacts in terms of rainfall and winds are going to be significantly lower than they might otherwise be. So we're going to be looking at just some periods of possible heavy rainfall. We're not expecting any really strong winds at this point in that area. The biggest risk is going to be the potential for heavy rainfall. So, and even that's going to be fairly limited. We're going to be looking at probably about 2 to 4 inches of rain, beginning as early as late tomorrow, and then continuing on and off through the day, Wednesday into Wednesday night. That's going to be the biggest overall issue. Thankfully, for the most part, most of Southeast Texas is not going to experience real life-threatening impacts based on the current forecast track. Apex of the Avatar wants to know when the strongest effects will arrive in the Lafayette area. We're going to be looking at those tropical storm force winds beginning between about 8 a.m. and noon. And then you'll probably have some rain before that, but that's when the tropical storm force winds are going to begin. Then conditions will deteriorate further as we go into the afternoon and evening. Right now, we're looking at a landfall sometime late Wednesday afternoon into Wednesday evening. So your eye or your center of circulation, whatever the case may be, if it's going to approach Lafayette, it's going to be Wednesday night. Okay, let's see. I'm up to 11:05 now, so I'm only 10 minutes behind everybody. I'm trying to catch up. Tara asks, so I've never experienced hurricanes before. We moved here from New York. Do you think this will hit DeRidder? I think you're going to have some impacts in DeRidder, but you're not going to be looking at your real dramatic impacts, at least not based on the current forecast track. Your biggest concern is going to be the potential for rainfall. Again, you're kind of in that 2 to 4 inch range for rainfall. That could be enough to cause some street flooding. You'll probably have a few tropical storm force wind gusts up that way that could result in a few power outages. That's not out of the realm of possibility. But overall, the impacts are going to be less there than they're going to be closer to the storm center. Mr. Rover Kane says, please tie down trampolines. Beryl sent a neighbor's trampolines flying and hit our roof. Trampolines can fly in 25, 30 mile an hour winds. It doesn't take a whole lot. I once heard it described as trampolines are nature's frisbees. Brenda says the storm that hit Lake Charles a few years ago did a bit of damage in Port Neches. No power for 4 days. Could Port Neches experience the same as that storm? This storm, at least based on the current forecast track, is going to be further east than Lake Charles. So your experiences will likely be less dramatic, less significant than what you saw in that event. Elia, I don't know if I'm saying that right. Does AI help predict models? I'm trying to think of exactly how you're trying to ask that question. Is AI involved in weather prediction? In the Weather Service, not so much yet. Now, there is ongoing experiments about the use of AI in forecasting and in model prediction. There are some private entities that have dabbled in that. I want to say AccuWeather has probably done some work with that as well. There are AI models out there. They're not currently incorporated into hurricane forecasting through the National Hurricane Center or anything that we do locally. They may be at some point in the future, should they prove successful, but that's still kind of in the experimental phase at this point. Killian asks, what are the chances of widespread power outages in the Sulphur Lake Charles area if the storm does in fact make landfall around the Lafayette area? Not particularly high, but we are going to be looking at probably some gust to low end tropical storm force. So if we get some dead tree branches or some damaged tree branches that fall onto a power line, we could see a few power outages. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but I wouldn't expect widespread power outages if we see a landfall further to the east from Lake Charles. Mary asks, what alcohol do I drink after answering all these questions? The good stuff. The good stuff. Adventure Girl asks, could it be a possible Category 2? Yes, the official forecast is for a Category 1, but we've been saying prepare for a category higher than what's being forecasted. So yes, a Category 2 is not out of the question. It could be. Brady asks, is it going to hit the offshore drilling rigs? Probably some of them. Probably a fair amount of them, actually. Those also have plans for tropical systems. They have organized shutdown measures that they can take if they are looking at a tropical system moving across. They could probably withstand a tropical storm. Most of them are built pretty tough out there. But they do have evacuation plans for personnel, and they have plans for shutting those rigs down in the event of them being affected. But yeah, I imagine that some of them, if not a fair amount of them, will be. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up for the time being. If you have a question that I missed for some reason, or if you're viewing this as a recording and you think of a question while we're not on actual live briefing here, feel free to send us a direct message on Facebook. You can also email me. My email address is on the screen there. It's my name with a dot in the middle, so donald.jones@noaa.gov. You can also give us a call here at our office, area code 337-477-5285. And we have forecasters here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to answer all your questions that way. You can send us a message on X. We're on X. You can also send us a message on Instagram, as we're through Instagram as well. So lots of ways to get in touch with us if you do have any questions still that you need answered. Our next briefing will be 4 p.m. this afternoon. We'll have the latest update from the National Hurricane Center at that time. So we'll have the latest with that and the expected impacts across our area if they have changed any between now and then. In the meantime, everyone have a wonderful rest of your morning. We'll see you back here 4 p.m. this afternoon.